You. Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to be here today. This is a webinar being sponsored by the National Judicial Network, a forum on human trafficking and immigration and state courts. I just wanted to start, for those of you who are judges who are joining us today, who may not have already be members of our network, I encourage you to join. Participants are judges for judges only. Any judicial decision-making officer can join as a participant of the network. And that we, in addition to these webinars, have 10 months a year do either a webinar or a peer-to-peer session. And we have several of those planned, which I'll talk about in a moment. To date, we have 495 participating judges from 40 states and 40 states, the District of Columbia, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And our upcoming programs the dates are scheduled through June. And we're in the process of working with our steering committee to determine the topics for the upcoming sessions for March and April. May will be promoting justice, understanding, and addressing adultification of children in courts. If there are particular topics you're interested in, please email us or send them to the chat. But I'm going to stop now so that I can turn this session over to Catherine Waltz and the team of steering committee judges who are going to assist us in this great presentation today. Catherine? Catherine, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. You just saw my lips move for about a full minute. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I understand that most of you, if not all of you, have participated in some of my other webinars, specifically focused on child labor trafficking. So I'm thrilled to be with you all, even though I can't see all of your faces. But I'm really excited to engage with you in this highly interactive webinar. And the goal of today is to make sure that everyone who participates has some more skills, some new ideas, and has new learning and abilities to be able to identify child labor trafficking and then also interview youth who may be victims of labor trafficking. So this is an interactive session. So I want to just remind everyone that we're all going to be working together. As brief background, just to introduce myself, I'm the director of the Center for the Human Rights of Children at Loyola University, which is an interdisciplinary center within the School of Law. I'm also co-director of our new Holistic Immigration Hub, and I've worked in the trafficking field for over 20 years as a practitioner representing survivors of trafficking, both sex and labor, in criminal and also immigration legal proceedings. I've also conducted research on specifically on child labor trafficking. Many of my clients who I worked with have been youth. And so I've met with dozens, countless numbers of, unfortunately, child labor trafficking survivors. I've learned a lot through that process, and I continue to learn, and I'm happy to share what I know with you as well as what I don't know. A couple of disclaimers before we move forward. Well, let me give you kind of just the run of the agenda for today. We're going to start out with just a quick review of the definitions of child labor trafficking and specifically labor trafficking, because there is no distinction, unlike sex trafficking, between labor trafficking for adults and children. The legal elements are the same. So we'll do a brief review of the statutes. You should all have a copy of the statutes and the definitions as part of your materials for today. And then we'll do some identification exercises. We're going to look at some case scenarios and brainstorm together. Does this fact pattern indicate that this might be a labor trafficking case based on our knowledge of the legal definition? And then from there on, we'll move to a brief presentation that I'll provide on screening, assessment and intake that comes before interviewing, which talks about the role of culture, the role of development, and the role of trauma in interviewing. Some of this is going to be familiar to you. It's not there's no substantive information on trauma that we're going to talk about because I'm presuming that most of you had some exposure to presentations and professional development on trauma. So it'll be really high level kind of on all those areas. And then we're going to do something fun. We're going to break out and interview a potential survivor of human trafficking. And our survivors are going to be role playing. And we have five amazing judges who are going to participate in this exercise as the survivor. And so we'll break out into groups and do that. Typically, I do this in a class with students or professionals over the course of a day. And so we're going to do a very kind of shortened, uh, discrete version of it, but I think we're going to learn a lot. So again, I'm really excited to spend this time with you. So without further ado, I'm going to just kind of move forward through the agenda as discussed. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I can't see them all, so I'll ask some of my colleagues to just, jump in with any questions or concerns. Great. Okay,
Catherine,
before. Mhm.
Catherine, this is Leslie. I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Okay, great. And then just to confirm, we have an hour and a half total, correct? Or hour?
Yes. Well,
Hour and a
we
half.
have an hour and it will be done at what I can't do the math. 4:30.
4:30 Eastern Standard Time. Okay, great. I panicked because for a second for all day, I was like, it's an hour and a half, it's an hour and a half. And then for about 10 seconds, I was like, oh my God, I can't do this all in 60 minutes. So, okay, let's jump in. Now, this is my first question for you all. We're going to focus on identifying and interviewing for the purpose of this webinar, but there are a lot of terms that sound the same but mean different things. So, what is the difference between an intake, an assessment, a screening, or an interview? And this is where I'm going to ask for maybe some input in the chat. And if someone could read any input, what is the difference? Or tell me what an intake is.
An interview is something where you get extensive details
Right.
from the person you're interviewing.
Right. It's an in-depth conversation, and that is designed to understand someone's experiences. It is usually much more detailed than an intake or a screening. Its purpose is more holistic, but also defined depending on what your goals are and the purpose of an interview. The setting may also be different. It's typically conducted in a private setting that's safe, and it's much more detailed. And that's what we're going to focus on in the back half. Great. Yes, an intake is the initial process of gathering basic information. Exactly. So you're gathering age, a referral source, some basic information, maybe immediate needs. Um, and then an assessment is also, and again, depending on your role or profession, there are also more developed terms around this. An assessment is where you're actually evaluating needs, risks, strengths to develop some sort of plan for services, right? Or recovery or personalized care. So, in this particular webinar, we're going to be focusing on identifying, which could be intake or screening, and then also interviewing. So we're not going to be assessing for services, although we know that that's exactly more in-depth process of evaluating exactly strengths. Okay, so you're just repeating. I'm sorry, you're writing what I wrote. Or what I just shared. So I'm going to review this later when we get to the interview because this is one of the areas I think that is sometimes often, especially for those of us who have been maybe engaged professionally in multiple roles, to understand kind of the distinction and what is the purpose of a particular meeting with a potential survivor. Is it just to identify their needs? Do we need to know if they're in fact a victim of labor trafficking, or do we just need to know what other service, legal, other potential needs that they may have. And so this is really important to consider. There are also resources that provide different screening tools or mechanisms or templates for all of these, and I'll be sharing those with the organizers after the presentation, hopefully to share with you. Okay, now this is where we're going to get into identifying child labor trafficking. So I've got a few scenarios, but before we do that, I just want to do a quick review of the statute, the U.S. Criminal Code statute around forced labor. And we're focusing on labor for the purpose of this webinar. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm just going to present it all in front of you, and hopefully you should also have this in your materials. And we're going to use this to review our cases that I'm going to present next and determine, is this potentially a labor trafficking case? Now, most of you have seen this already, and you've also seen this way of organizing, kind of a shortcut of how to organize all of these terms, these legal terms, this process ends means. And I really like this particular chart because it starts with the end, right? What are the services? Does this meet a definition of involuntary servitude, debt bondage, sex trafficking, labor or services? And then what are the means? Is there force? Is there fraud? Is there coercion? And for those of you who are with me in other presentations, you know that coercion is really the key in terms of, and I think key, but also the most challenging part to apply in these cases in terms of what does it mean? Scheme, plan, the scheme, means of scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause the person to believe that if that person did not perform those labor services, that that person or another would suffer harm or restraint, right? So this could be physical, it could be psychological. And then what is the process? What were the acts that the perpetrator took to get the victim in that situation? And it doesn't have to be all of these things. It could be recruiting or harboring or transporting or providing or obtaining. Okay. And so this is a model that was produced, a modified version of the typical kind of process means ends by CAS, which is an organization in California, the Coalition Against the Coalition Against Trafficking. And I have the website here for you. So this is the part now where we're going to review some cases and then do a little bit of review and thinking about how we can apply our knowledge of the federal statute, of this kind of way of thinking about, do we see an ends? Do we see the means? Do we see a process? Could this be potentially labor trafficking? So we'll start with case scenario one, and I will read this out loud, but I won't read many slides out loud. So Sonia is 15 years old and from Guatemala. In 2024, she and her uncle and cousin set off to the United States. Life was dangerous in her hometown. When they arrived at the border and crossed, they were apprehended by Border Patrol. Sonia was immediately separated from her uncle and cousin and was sent to a detention center for unaccompanied children. She was in this facility for 6 months before being released to her uncle. Her uncle and cousin were living in the suburbs of Chicago. Her uncle told her she needed to work to pay off the cost of housing. He found her a job cleaning at a nearby hotel, and he told Sonia that she would be cleaning during the night shift, which was 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. every day. She did not receive payment for her work, and instead her uncle took care of it, had the money she earned deposited into his bank account. She attended school with her cousin, but soon dropped out because she was too tired from her evening work and could not keep up on assignments. Sonia's uncle found another job at a local restaurant for her to work during the day, and when she was home, she was expected to also cook and clean. So, what do you all think? Does this meet the federal legal definition of trafficking? And I'm open to if folks want to take themselves off mute or if you want to just contribute in the chat. What are your thoughts? Again, thinking about process means ends. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. And if you say yes, tell me why. What is the labor service? Like, so it's not, so we're going to go through and kind of answer the questions here. What is the ends? What does the mean? What is the process? And how does that apply to these statutory elements of forced labor? Okay, she didn't have a place to live unless she worked, so that the housing was conditional. Great. Child exploitation. I want to hear more about that. Okay, uncle benefited. So there's some sort of financial benefit, right, to Sonia's labor. Working a lot without payment. So couple questions. Does the fact that she went to school mean that she wasn't being trafficked? No, absolutely. Kids go to school and they can still be victims of trafficking, right? What if she did get money? What if the uncle didn't take all of it? Is it still possible that she would be trafficked? Yes, that's still a possibility, right? And clearly there are a lot of details that we don't know. Yeah, what would she use the money for? Was she was she being told how to spend that money? What are some other fact patterns or parts of this case scenario that indicate trafficking? What was the means? So we know there's labor services in the hotel and the cleaning. Okay, that it was conditional on housing, debt to her uncle. Potentially, it's unclear if there's a debt, but that was the condition of living with him. Did she, yeah, work over school? Any other thoughts? Any other input from those expecting to cook and clean? And this one, it's not isolation, excellent. It's not clear with the information that's presented right now, but all of these case scenarios that I'm providing are cases that I have worked on or consulted with. And in this particular case, right, that housing was conditional. And it was beyond just helping the family out, which sometimes is tricky to distinguish. But in this particular case, I would also ask, what is her cousin doing? If she and the cousin are both going to school, and presumably they're both school age, how is she being treated differently from the cousin, right? So if she's being treated differently, has different expectations about school attendance, about work, about what she contributes to the family, right? That is also an indication um, of discrepancy in terms of how the family unit sees her and her value. Yeah. And so this is actually a really good comment here. We get cases of human smuggling where they have to pay someone for a debt for getting them to the border, right? And so does Sonia have freedom to determine how she pays off her debt in this situation? What's her agency in figuring out how to pay? We all have debts. We all have debts to pay off, whether it's loans or mortgages, school loans or whatnot. But the distinction here is how much agency does she have in the terms of how to pay off her debt? Is that debt going away? Exactly. How much all the things that you're saying. And some of this we don't know because we just have a long paragraph in front of us. So these are all really good points. Are there any questions you'd want to ask Sonia? Yeah, she could not have a reasonable belief that she could not leave or seek other possible consequences. And that's something that isn't clear, but that's probably a question that we would want to ask. It sounds like, from what we know, the uncle is in charge of all of the employment decisions and opportunities. Great. Yeah, how are her basic needs? This is a good question. How are her basic needs being met? Does she have to pay for them, right? I'd want to ask, how is she being treated differently? The expectations are different from her versus her cousin, which I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Does she feel she has any choice with how she pays her debt off? Yeah. What were expectations? What did she and her uncle talk about before they came? And how is that different? That's excellent.
Hmm.
Now, here's a tricky question, and then I want to move on. If her living situation was similar in her home country, does that change the possibility of her being a potential survivor of labor trafficking? if this, if the relationship seemed the same, right, where uncle is in charge of all of her time, all of her work, does that make a difference? Right. She shouldn't be exploited either way. Okay. Good. And clearly there are a lot more, yes, it may influence her perception, but not in how our laws are applied. Exactly. So sometimes these things are normalized and it gets tricky. I'll talk more about this when we get to cultural considerations because in some cultures, the age of majority is younger. It's not 18. And it's very normal for younger children to work and be part of the kind of economic unit of the household. But when, in this particular situation, it's somewhat clear that she is being treated differently from other youth of her approximate age in the household and being taken advantage of. Great. I love all these responses. Okay. I'm going to move on and then we'll pause after the three scenarios to see if there's any questions as well. Okay. Case scenario number two. Max is 12 years old when his mom decides to join a new spiritual group, the Mark of Saints. The Mark of Saints is very strict and requires all of its 200 plus members to register with the church and contribute a certain amount of money in annual fees for their salvation. The fees are frequently raised, and individuals and families who cannot pay the fees are encouraged to take jobs with the Mark of Saints to ensure their salvation. Max's mom tells him that he needs to help out around the house more while his mom helps the church recruit new members. Max doesn't want to do chores at home, and he is upset that his mom makes him do this. When he protests, she hits him hard and locks him up in the basement, telling him that he needs to go tidy up the basement and learn his lessons before he can get out. Okay, does this meet the federal legal definition of human trafficking? And then if you say yes or no, tell me why in the chat. I'm going to actually go back a few slides to go to this. Whoops. Ends, means, and process. What were the services that were performed? What were the means? What was the process? So he has choice, but there's no force. What is the labor or services here? Let's start with that. This is why I like this chart because it starts with the meat of it. What is the labor or services? And again, that the definition of let's remind ourselves of labor trafficking or the crime of forced labor under a federal statute has evolved from involuntary servitude, which came from slavery, right? So there's a financial benefit. What is the financial benefit here? Or is there one? Cleaning the basement? Okay, potentially coercion of emotional, spiritual abuse for the salvation. But in this particular situation, is Max, with the facts that you have, is Max a victim of labor trafficking? I'm seeing a lot, it might be abuse because he's locked in the basement. No, may not rise to the level of trafficking. I know it's easy just to say yes or no without being like the why. So tell me why it's not. I like this exercise because it's got a lot of facts in it that sounds like it's leading up to trafficking. But sh the mom here is not receiving a financial benefit, right? She seems like she needs to, she's working for the Mark of Saints, but in Max's case, he doesn't want to do his chores, so she punishes him, locks him in the basement, right? Now, chores can also be chores can also be can rise to the level of trafficking. What you call it is one thing, but it depends again on the situation. There seems to be some consensus that there's some abuse, maybe some other crimes or allegations that rise to the level of like child abuse. But we would probably need to ask more questions about this because at this point, there's not a financial benefit. The labor services aren't financially benefiting not only mom, but the Mark of Saints at this point. Great. Okay. Any Yes, it depends on if the chores reach the levels. So in the prior scenario, Sonia, like her chores might have been you have to work outside the house, right? To help contribute. And those were characterized as chores. So how it's labeled is it's kind of one layer, but we need to kind of look beneath the surface. And again, this is from the information that we have. This is the point of this exercise is really, again, practicing what are the elements in the fact scenario that's presented that meet that federal definition of trafficking. Doesn't matter if she's not specifying the needs to work amount of hours, you need to work off a debt. I mean, in this case, it does. She's just asking to do chores at home while she helps the church, right? There's nothing, with the facts that we have. Again, if we were into choir and that changed and was elevated, that would certainly be a red flag. But mom, in this scenario, mom is locking Max up in a basement and physically assaulting him or corporal punishment. Again, that's states have different laws about that. There's different perceptions about that, but it's not quite rising to the level of trafficking yet. Okay, moving on in the interest of time. Some of these can be frustrating because you're like, I want this to be trafficking. We don't want anyone to be trafficked, but I love that like we have to be discerning between different types of abuse and crime and trafficking. And often, survivors of trafficking, both sex and labor, are victims of other types of abuse, neglect, and crimes, right? And so we need to consider that as well, but not everything is trafficking. Okay. Case scenario 3. Debbie is 15 years old and living with her parents in Nevada. Her stepfather is both physically and sexually abusive, and she feels that her mother is powerless. She sleeps over at other friends' houses to get away from her own situation as often as she can, but she feels like she's worn out her welcome. She meets Paul, an older man, at a party with some friends. He tells her she's beautiful, she's smart. He takes her to parties, restaurants, and clubs. He buys her dinner and occasional gifts. He becomes her boyfriend, and he tells Debbie that she can help him by working for a friend of his who has a bar where girls dance. Debbie does it. She doesn't need to sleep with any of the clients, and she loves all the attention and money she's able to make while dancing. She goes shopping once a week, and her friends are jealous about her new clothes and all the attention she's getting from men. Debbie still attends school and dances at night. Is this labor trafficking? Yeah, that's a good question. What is the financial benefit to him? Do we know that? He just says he's gonna, he can, he asks Debbie to do this to help him out, but that's not clear. For those of you who are saying yes, why do you think? Oh, some of you are saying it's sex trafficking. Sounds like he's grooming her. And then this is what I do with my students, grooming her how? He takes her to parties, he takes her to restaurants, he takes her out to dinner, he buys her clothes, he buys her gifts. He tells her she's amazing, she's got a great body, she can dance at this club, right? But is the groom like then what happens after the grooming? Okay, just stop short of the lead up, not unclear. Not labor trafficking, but has some red flags for sex trafficking. So what is the, let's go back to what is the ends? What are the services? Is dancing sex trafficking? Or is it sexual services or is it labor? This is tricky, and I did this intentionally because if it's a strip club, um, it depends sometimes on state statutes. Some under federal law, I worked on a case like this where young people were actually forced to dance in bars. They weren't necessarily strip clubs. And I've also worked on cases where women were working in strip clubs, and both of those cases were prosecuted as forced labor and involuntary servitude. Now, because she's a minor who's dancing, some state laws, but she wasn't sleeping with clients, right? So it was dancing, and in my cases, the girls had a quota, not part of this fact scenario. But in some states, the state law for sexual exploitation includes minor sexual exploitation includes dancing in strip clubs. So it depends on how this case is being strategically pursued. Even though she's taking off her clothes, again, it depends on like if there's a state law that includes stripping as sexual exploitation for youth, and I don't remember which states do this. But in these cases, if you look at the definition of what is sex trafficking and what is which is an exchange of sexual services, and that is even defined more under the federal statute, it is not the same as dancing, even if they're taking their clothes off. It could lead to sexual servitude if she's forced to sleep with her boyfriend or other people. Um, right. I'm not aware of any states where minors can dance at a strip club. So there are clearly some sort of labor violations. There may be other laws that are violated. It just stopped short.
And
Exactly. Maybe hasn't gotten there far yet.
Catherine,
But I
somebody's,
will, like, as I shared, I'm sorry, was someone saying something?
yeah, this is Leslie. I was going to jump in. Somebody's talking about where to go. Federal court for enticement.
Yep,
That,
potentially. Hmm. Now, this isn't the scenario I presented, but I've worked on cases where it was minors dancing in a bar provocatively, forced to dress in a particular way, and that was pursued as labor trafficking and involuntary servitude because they were not providing sexual services as the financial benefit. The dancing was part of the scheme, plan, or pattern that was enticing more customers to dance with these young women, often girls, and pay more for alcohol. And that was financially benefiting. And then the cover, like to the bar, and that was financially benefiting the trafficker who's recruiting these young girls and women, right? Another case that I worked on where it was in a strip club where these were adults working in a strip club, but they had a quota. If they didn't make the quota, they were abused, right? So even though they were legally allowed to work in the strip club, the other aspects and experience of their work in a strip club rose to the level of labor trafficking and involuntary servitude. Yes. I'll pull up the definition of enticement as well. But again, this is just I'm demonstrating that there are other crimes that can be part of this that may be a red flag to possible trafficking. In this particular situation, it's a little unclear. But hopefully, I've also given you some examples of other cases that have been federally prosecuted, and I can put those cases in the notes too with similar fact pattern, right? Where it's a minor dancing, dressed provocatively, or or others who are dancing in a strip club, but it was pursued as a labor trafficking case because the specific services that are performed, right? This means here, and excuse me, the ends in this paradigm here is dancing or stripping, but not providing sexual services. I like though that some of you have experience in working on cases like this and thinking about things like enticement as well. Okay, so that's our identifying
Catherine, just
potential
one,
cases. And what was that?
sorry, just one question that came up in the chat that I wanted to see if you could clarify. I'm not sure you caught it. And that somebody was asking whether they have to be underage to have the labor, whether age is a factor in labor trafficking, where it has to
No,
be.
because in labor trafficking, there's no distinction, right? In some, where it is a distinction, and I apologize if this wasn't clear, some state laws define commercial sexual exploitation as inclusive of dancing in strip clubs or performing in a sexual or provocative manner, right? But under the federal definition of labor trafficking, dancing alone without providing explicit sexual services is considered labor trafficking. So it's a strategic decision for the criminal legal system or other legal systems or courts in terms of how they may want to pursue that. And I don't think there's like a wrong way of doing that. I think for my purposes, I just want to make sure that you all understand those distinctions. Is it wrong? Yes. Now, how is it defined under law? It depends for state statutes. But under the federal law, if there isn't a commercial sex act as defined under federal law, this could be categorized as labor trafficking. Did I answer that question sufficiently?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Um, okay, so thank you for that. If we had time, we can go through more kind of case scenarios. And again, it's hard because it's a paragraph and it's really just issue spotting, looking for red flags, and some are more, we have more questions that we want to ask. But I did want to make sure that we had some time to kind of practice teasing out what is labor trafficking versus other crimes versus red flags. And so I feel confident that you all have some more kind of experience doing that. And I know many of you have come to these webinars with a lot of experience already, so I also appreciate everyone's input and participation. Now we're going to switch to interviewing. And so this is a condensed version of a module that I do in professional development and other contexts, and also for students that I spend a lot more time on, where I go into kind of what are some cultural um, thinking about things from a cultural perspective, developmental perspective, like from an age, like how do we interview someone who's 6 versus 12 versus an adult, and also thinking about trauma. And at the end of the day, I think what I just want you all to walk away with is understanding that development, trauma, and culture have should be all be considerations when interviewing children who may be trafficked or anyone who's a victim of violence. And so because the crime of labor trafficking does not distinguish between nationality, ethnicity, age, and the definition doesn't have any carve outs like in sex trafficking, you don't need to prove the force, fraud, or coercion, right? That means it's unnecessary as long as you can prove it. There's a commercial sex act. For labor, that's the definition is the same. And so this is where it gets tricky. And this is where it requires much more kind of nuanced and thoughtful approach to speaking to anyone who's a survivor to trying to elicit that information that meets that definition of, was there force, threat of force, physical restraint? Was there serious harm or threat of serious harm? Was there abuse or threat and abuse of the law or legal process? Was there a scheme, plan, or pattern involved that would cause that person to believe that if they didn't perform the labor services, another person would suffer serious harm or they would, which is the definition of coercion. And so that requires a lot more intentionality and kind of thinking about what do I want to ask? What information do I need to know? What might fit into this category? But the issues are similar for those of you who have worked with survivors of sex trafficking also, where you may have youth who don't want to disclose, who don't want to talk to you, who um, have things that they don't want to share, and that's normal, and we'll get to that. Okay, so let's briefly talk about culture. So quickly, just as a caveat, there's no culture that is homogenous. So just a few kind of more high level things to consider. And many of you may have other input or thoughts that you think are important to share with the group. And I encourage you to share those in the chat as well. Um, Working with foreign nationals, and this is also documented in research. So everything that I'm putting on a slide here is not just like my own personal opinion or my anecdotal experience, but is also documented in multiple disciplines. But many foreign nationals may have more of a stigma surrounding discussion of mental health. So if we're talking about, was this traumatic? Was this even when we're talking about services, right? If it's not just an interview, but we're doing an assessment around, being eligible for counseling or some sort of other mental health services, this is often perceived with more stigma from other cultures than and in America. And even within the American system, there are some cultures, including African Americans, who may have more stigma around mental health and services due to, systemic issues in history and access. And I very rarely use the word trauma when I'm talking to clients or potential survivors of trafficking or other even victims of other crimes and other trauma because it can be triggering. So typically, use the word that's chosen by the person that you're interviewing if they are actually labeling that. Additionally, familial loyalty is has also an elevated role in many other cultures. So there may be a reluctance to discuss trauma and trafficking when there's a family element. So I've had a lot of these cases where it may be an aunt or an uncle, right? Like in Sonia's case, where there is a very much a reluctance to undermine, to get in trouble a family member. I think this happens in American culture as well, particularly for youth, because remember, if we're talking about young people, they are wholly dependent often on the adults in their life. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the age of majority may be different in other places. Like we think about the federal definition, the international definition of an adult is 18. We know from brain science that actually our brains don't stop developing and we don't actually fully mature until we're in mid 20s. But culturally, in some places, if you're 15 or 16, you can be out of household, right? So sometimes youth are engaging in that way. And then similarly, the concept of work and expectations of your contributions to the family may be different in other places. And then youth may be also taught to defer to authority. And I have this here even more than the truth. So I've seen this happen a couple of times where an adult is questioning a child, particularly someone of authority, maybe it's law enforcement or a judge or someone, and they're eager to please that person that they believe is an authority figure. And so, in that eagerness to please and to be deferential, they will answer questions in a way that they think will please that person versus actually sharing kind of an authentic story. Other things that may be familiar to some of you as well, kinship terms may be different. This gets tricky, like if you're, preparing an affidavit or if you're trying to keep track of who's who. A lot of times, people are referred to as uncle or auntie, even if they have no biological relationship. Um, and all of this is really difficult that may not make it past translation, but this is just working with interpreters is kind of is beyond the scope of this particular webinar, but just keeping this in mind. And I've had some youth, particularly youth who are coming from indigenous cultures, who may have a more stoic affect, which can be misperceived or mischaracterized as not being engaged or lying or not being forthright, right? But this is part of their it's part of their culture and how they communicate. Again, I mentioned this is super high level, really, really fast. So let's go to developmental considerations. Again, all of this is supported by research. These are just kind of headlines. So I'm going to go through kind of thinking about linguistics and age. And the ABA actually, before I go through some of this, has a really great list of principles and a book that I will include in the resources on and interviewing children. But their six principles is that we don't actually question children. Like we children do not communicate the same way as adults, and particularly those who have been mistreated. And children and adults don't speak the same language, so don't even go into a potential interview assessment screening thinking that by the time kids are about 5 years old, the language that they speak may sound like ones that we do, but the assumption is made that language is not complete, and it isn't complete until they get much older. So, for example, things like flying planes can be dangerous. Like understanding that really develops in kind of middle adolescence, right? Other communication skills, such as giving complete, coherent, kind of a linear account of a personal past event, is still developing in older adolescents. And then also adult use of language does not always reflect adult-like linguistic or cognitive capabilities. And then young children also have a hard time attending to more than two things at once, right? So and I have this here. And they're also much more vulnerable to suggestion and answering ways to please the adult interviewer. Um, and they're more likely to offer reliable information when talking about events that are part related to their own interests. And then they're easily led. So if you say, "Were you at your house when you're supposed to be at school?" in a stern voice, you're telling them exactly how they're supposed to answer, right? No, I wasn't. At least that's what my kids do. Because everything that I'm saying here, I do with my clients. I forget about when I'm working with my own children. So just, some things to think about. Um, let's see if there's anything else here. So younger children, not just preschoolers, but I would say younger children, also youth where English may be a second language or they're coming from another place, much more difficulty with negatives, difficulty with pronouns, understanding the difference between, she, him, her, they, them. Respond much better to concrete examples that ask them to demonstrate. So I have here as an example, show me where you were hurt instead of tell me how he or she hurt you, right? Show me where you hurt. Um, define terms in simple action oriented ways. And I think it's always to check in on those terms and how they're being used. And I'll provide an example of this as well. They will use terms for time, kinship, and distance before they actually understand their meaning, right? And for any of us who have kids or worked with kids, we know this, right? They may say, "Oh yeah, we did this yesterday or last week," when it was actually months ago. And then I attended a training actually with a judge many years ago who said something that resonated with me, but thinking about being simple and to be developmentally appropriate, try to use the least amount of words as possible, particularly if the child is younger. So more complicated questions are should be reserved for older youth and adults. Young kids, more likely than not, won't tell you if they don't understand a question. This leads through adolescence, and they often confuse their own history with something maybe they saw on television or a movie or a friend's experience. As they get older, they can still make errors with passives, the differences between ask and tell, still often again. And if this is compounded with trauma, which we'll get to next, not mature enough at organizing a detailed narrative in a linear fashion, may still be eager to please adults. For adolescents, again, they may have required those adult narrative skills that I talked about, or may not, depending on how their life experience has been compounded by trauma, potential educational gaps, if they're unattached, unaccompanied, right? And some of this could be as a result of being trafficking, much more focused on the present and much more reluctant to acknowledge if they don't understand. Like, even if I say, "Well, do you understand what I'm saying?" They'll say, "Yep, I do." And they don't. So we're going to get to some examples of this. Now, I'm assuming that most of you, if not all of you, have had some exposure and engagement with um, professional development opportunities on understanding what trauma is. And that's not part of this course. It's just thinking about, for this webinar, thinking about how trauma may impact eliciting information, right? So if we know what trauma is, we want to try to undo or respond to some of the results of trauma. And this is part of we talked about culture development, how to think about talking to youth from a trauma-informed approach, right? So what's important is transparency, predictability, client control, reliability, proactive support, and patience. I'm going to go through some kind of examples of some of that when we get into tactics. But these types of tactics will help meet children where they are at, particularly for those who have experienced trauma and complex trauma. So tell them exactly why are you asking the question, right? Tell them who you are. Say, "I'm going to be here for 30 minutes or an hour," and then that's how long you're going to be. We're going to take two breaks or a break every 10 minutes, and that's exactly what you're going to do. That provides that transparency, that predictability. Don't make promises you can't keep, right? So that is reliability and predictability. Be honest as you can be. And also, I think this is really hard for attorneys in multiple roles, but just, patience and being okay with silence in an interview. Okay, so before we get into our exercise, I want to go through the very briefly some techniques, tactics, and tips, and then we'll go through the exercise. This is an oldie but a goodie, and this is I think just an example of making sure that we are using the same language and understand what what our children are thinking who we're interviewing. And this comes from a social science study. Question: Who is Tim? Answer: He's my advocate. And then, well, what is an advocate to you? And the answer is someone who prays and has sex with you in this particular case. I've had this situation in trafficking come up where it's like it's an aunt or it's an uncle or it's my boss or it's my friend or it's this other title role, but we have to dig in. What does that mean? Like, what is that relationship with you? And having it be child led. So, a couple things. So, here's an example. Did you tell your aunt you didn't want to come to the United States after she told you you would join your other cousins working at a restaurant? Do you remember what she told you when you told her you didn't want to work at the restaurant? How can we improve upon this, or what's wrong with this situation, with this line of questioning? Okay, it's a complex question. It's really complicated. There's too much going on. So thinking about how you can simplify that. Let's thinking about like how do we go through something that might be embarrassing? So potential question is, so I know this could be something that might be embarrassing to talk about, but when you were traveling to the United States from Mexico, did you experience any sexual abuse? This isn't a terrible question. This isn't a wrong approach, but it could also trigger and signal that this is embarrassing and something that an experience that might be connected to some sort of stigma. So when it comes to approaching questions that might be about something that's a little bit embarrassing or controversial, I personally like to the tactic of normalizing it. So I will say, I've worked with a lot of youth who have migrated, and taken the same route as you have. And what is very common is that they are victims of crime and abuse as part of that experience. Is that something that happened to you? Okay. Um, just in the interest of time, we're going to move on. So that's a good segue to this, right before we get into our exercise. What do I do if the child doesn't want to talk about their abuse? Well, they're not going to talk about their abuse. You can tell them why you're asking, you can tell them why it's important, but maybe that's not what they want to talk about. Maybe in Sonia's case, she doesn't want to talk about what her uncle did to her, but she is willing to talk about the work that she had to do, right? If the child is protecting their trafficker, it's probably not something that you're going to address, or maybe it's not even your role, depending on your role in interviewing the child. And this happens a lot in cases that I see, like someone's protecting their boyfriend or their parent who's potentially a perpetrator. I'm not going to change that relationship in the course of an interview. So I'm going to ask questions about other things. And knowing that that's a normal in these situations. If they don't want to talk about their exploitation, maybe they want to talk about things that they saw or things that they other people experienced. These are just a couple examples of tactics. And if they're too distraught or incapable of participating in an interview, then we're not going to do it. We don't want to re-traumatize that child or do more harm in that situation. So we may want to just say, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to perhaps assess for other needs and come back to it. This is a very quick overview, and now we're going to jump into our interviews. I'm going to skip this real quick because I think we know this about rapport building, being comfortable with silence, providing choices. For this exercise that we're going to do, we're going to break out into 5 groups, and our 5 judges will introduce themselves. I want to make sure that everybody has their case brief, which is your goal is to interview Adriana in your groups and identify whether her experiences may meet the statutory elements of human trafficking under federal law, which is what we did earlier. Okay, I want you to respond supportively, but this is not an assessment. This is an interview. And so your role in this exercise is going to be as pretend you're a judge or a legal advocate. In each group, you can pick a role. And so hopefully you have this case brief where you have a little bit of information about the young woman that you're interviewing. She's 15 years old. She's from El Salvador. She is in a facility for unaccompanied minors. She was identified in a raid conducted at a La Quinta Inn by a joint FBI and ICE operation. The primary suspect, Miguel, was arrested and initially charged with you've got some charges, peonage, harboring, kidnapping, assault. Additional charges are pending. He's in federal custody. The staff thinks Adriana is a victim of trafficking. And so you're going to have 15, you're going to have 20 minutes to interview. It's a simulation. We know that this would never happen in 20 minutes. It would never happen in an hour. This would normally take probably multiple interviews, but we're going to do it anyway. And now I'm going to pause and ask our judges to introduce themselves, who will be joining your groups about a minute or two after we break out into our 5 groups. I don't know who wants to go first, but I'm so excited and they will all be role playing Adriana. So when they pop into your Zoom group, you will not, you were going to pretend that they are Adriana and they're going to pretend that they are Adriana as well.
So I'll call in people. Judge Stryker,
Mhm.
Uh, Gustavo Stryker. I'm a judge in Los Angeles Superior Court in California. Hello.
Judge Collins,
Hi, I'm Rosemary Collins, retired circuit judge from Northern Illinois. I was on the bench for 30 years, and I was the presiding judge of our family division and our domestic violence division.
Judge Briel.
Good afternoon. When I'm not Adriana, I'm a judge in the San Francisco Superior Court. I'm co-chair of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, and I handle all our T and U visa certifications.
Judge Maven.
Good afternoon. I'm Judge Susan Maven, retired from New Jersey Superior Court. I sat in family court for most of my 22 plus years on the bench, and I have a bit of experience with juvenile court and human trafficking programs.
Judge Gonzalez.
My name is Ramona Gonzalez. I'm the newly retired judge from La Crosse, Wisconsin. I was the president of NCJ-FCJ from 2019 to 2020. I did a general jurisdiction calendar and served my 30 years on the bench. So delighted to be here with you this afternoon.
Back to you, Catherine.
Great. I'm so excited. So you all know all of the judges who are role-playing Adriana have the same, like a brief affidavit. They have facts that hopefully you can try to elicit. They are all going to be role-playing as kind of as realistically as possible. And then hopefully this is an opportunity for you to learn what you've learned, apply what you've learned in this webinar, as well as things that you know from your own practice in trying to identify information. Is Adriana a victim of human trafficking? And if so, what type of trafficking? All right, so now I'm going to ask our lovely organizers to break everybody up in their groups. I will be a floater. If I pop in, ignore me. I'm not there. I'm just a ghost. All right, I'm not sharing any more slides. I think we're just going to jump in. Is everyone back?
I think so.
Our Oscar winner, okay, so again, this would never happen in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, anything like that. I want to spend the first few minutes just thanking our judges. I'm going to ask our participants if they have any comments about what they felt like was most challenging, and then also what worked. And then we're going to ask our Adrianas to provide a little bit of feedback as well. And then we're going to answer the question, do we think that Adriana was trafficked or could be trafficked? So participants, you can put this in the chat. You can, thanks with 90 people.
Yeah, they're all able to unmute themselves too, Catherine, if they want.
Okay, if you don't mind, you can unmute yourself as well. Yeah. I just can't see you, so
Right, don't raise your hands. You should just start talking if you would like.
Yeah.
Yes, to unmute yourself and let's see your faces too, given the context of the exercise.
Oh, there's poor Ashton, who I was so hard on. Sorry, Ashton.
Oh, not at all. I worked on the hotline, and I almost wanted to ask to like take the camera off because I could get back into that, like, let's just pretend I'm like on the phone and I've got a document in front of me where I'm taking information. But no, I thought you did a really great job. And it's just when someone is wanting to provide information or they're kind of not very comfortable providing, and they might get defensive. So you did a wonderful job. So I wouldn't say you were hard on me at all, but I think just the building rapport, knowing when to ask questions, knowing when to maybe push a little further, and then wanting to make sure you're sort of on like a kind of a linear track to kind of make sure let's try to get this information. But it was a really great exercise.
Great. Building rapport, I think, is really hard to do in a short period of time. I was in a couple of the groups where it was like, why, right? And you feel this as the survivor. You're like, who are you? Why are you asking me these questions? How many of you had that experience? Okay. What other feedback do folks have? What was challenging, and also what do you felt like was successful? I know not everyone got to ask questions, but even in your observations.
Where are my people? Where are my people? We
One of
had
the
good, we
things,
had good interactions.
yeah, one of the things that I found was um, instructive was how you had to really be listening to what she was saying and follow that rather than kind of come in with your prepared ideas about what you were going to ask. And then that made me think about how extremely difficult it would be if the individual you were interviewing wasn't willing to talk at all. I mean, you wouldn't know where to go or how your questions were impacting them.
Right.
Anna Faye has her hand up now.
Yeah, it was definitely a good exercise of just not having a rigid set of questions of order of where you want to ask things. You just having to follow, okay, that's not a door she wants to open right now. Let me follow this other door. And then she would definitely get really emotional. And I think part of obtaining good information is not allowing yourself to get sucked into their pain so that it seems neutral. Because I've noticed in interviews in the past with victims, with survivors, I'm sorry, if they feel like what they're saying is too much for you to take, sometimes they'll withdraw and not disclose completely what happened.
Yeah, that's great. I see in one of the comments too, someone says forensic interview, she may need a forensic interview, and that's always potentially an option, but not always. Sometimes it may not be a case that's part of a criminal investigation, or other settings where that may not be possible, but it's a very good suggestion too. What other observations?
Paul has his hand
We
up.
have a hand for
Paul has his hand
Medina.
up.
Paul?
Yes, I guess something to improve, and it's because I think we didn't ask her if she was comfortable speaking in English since she's from El Salvador, or yeah. And we didn't ask if she thought that she needed to see a doctor, or if she has been with the doctor just to make sure that she's okay.
Yeah, for this exercise, the presumption was that that Adriana is fluent in English, and that and you may elicit information that is related to health and other needs, right? That would be part of an assessment, but for the purpose of the exercise and this interview, it's listening for all those things, but also, is this person potentially a victim of trafficking?
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
I just want to respond to Mr. Medina's point, because there was one person in my group who, to bond with me, said, "Oh, I'm from El Salvador as well." And in an interview process, he might have then wanted to speak in his language, in the like that she might have been more receptive to that if it were real life.
Yeah, we all are more receptive in speaking in our first language, right? Adriana, do you have any just comments or observations as well?
I thought that in the short time we had, that there was some rapport building and a kindness, a persistence to the questions, but a real kind of kindness, not letting up, but concern in the voices of the questioners in my group.
And how did they make you feel when you were?
I felt better. I mean, I talked more, although I wanted the fiery Cheetos and no one was giving them to me, and I was hungry.
Right. One of my interviewers asked me when I ate last and if I wanted some food, and that immediately made me feel better because I don't really know what I want and I don't know what to ask what I want. But when they asked about food and when did I eat last and did they want some food, I thought, oh, this is somebody who
Mhm.
is caring about me, and I like that.
Mhm.
At one
And
point
you
in the
opened up
interview,
after that.
Yeah, I did open up, and if we'd had a little more time, she would have gotten the information she needed because I was giving it to her, and I think she would have gotten there. We just ran out of time.
We have another hand.
Yes,
can it,
in this case, it was very interesting to see how Adriana was having a trauma-related response by avoidance and trying to not we are very limited cooperation and also difficulty from Adriana to verbalize her experiences. Um, Even like that, it was very hard to interview her, and this is the kind of interviews that take long time and multiple hours, making sure that they rest, etc. Um, she still displays some information that were clue, like when she mentioned that she traveled with a lot of people, that there was a male, that she was just not sleeping well. And still, with those three elements, I was kind of ready to go with their basic needs as a first basic questions to do in the interview to see definitely how everything was being provided for her. But yes, as you say, the time is very much limited to progress on this. So thank you. It was a very, very good exercise.
I just want to say that in my group, at one point, as I was being upset, I started spewing a lot of information. And I initially tried to describe a carnival environment. But then when I said at some point I was taken to a motel to sleep with men, my group latched on trying to understand what I did with the men. And I very early said nothing much because police came in and nothing happened. But there were a lot of questions about, well, what happened there? I need to know what happened at the motel. What happened? Totally missed that nothing happened there. I said nothing happened. It was really what happened at the carnival. So, it's really active listening. And someone said it best where sometimes you think you want to ask questions already and you're heading in that direction. But I was saying something that was really poignant, like, oh, the bathrooms were disgusting. We only had one bag of pretzels and one bottle of water. So there were a lot of things I was putting out there that we didn't have time to fully, develop in that way. But active listening in an interview is really, really important because you miss a lot of the fine detail if you had more time.
Mhm.
Excuse me, had more time. But our group was very engaged. I enjoyed the repartee.
We're losing some of our folks because we've come to the end, Catherine. Wow. Yeah, we have to have to come back.
I So I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first time I've done this in this format. And so lesson learned is we need a little bit more time with this and less talking for me at the beginning. So I appreciate everyone's patience and sticking around at this point. I know everyone's really busy. I just wanted to make a couple kind of observations and closing comments. I think you cannot underestimate the rapport building, and that can be done in a short time. It may not always be successful. But like sometimes I've been in a situation where I'm like, I only have an hour with this person to assess. And I will be honest. I'll say, hi, my name is, this is my role. This is what I do. Like, am I here to assess your needs or am I here to assess your legal needs? Right. And to distinguish those issues like right away and tell them why you only have an hour. Like why, that I only have an hour here, that the police will only give me this amount of time and I'm going to ask you some questions that may be hard to answer. You may not want to answer them and that's okay, but here's what I can do. Role of confidentiality if you have it, role of privilege if you have it. And then that active listening piece is really great. And I love what you said, Judge, about like the focus on the sex trafficking in this scenario. For those of you who not everyone got to the same place, the Adriana was pulled out of a La Quinta Inn at a motel where there was sexual services happening. She was not involved in that, and that was intentional because this happens, right? Where you people want to focus on the sex trafficking and miss some of the other really, critical components of the story. So I just want to say thank you to my Adrianas, my judges. I want to thank you to the participants for your participation, your grace, your expertise, and your knowledge in this exercise, and even just in your commitment and learning more about trafficking, and particularly child labor trafficking, and your commitment to professional development. And I really hope that I get to see you all again. And again, thank you for your time. And I apologize that we're going 3 minutes over, but thank you very, very much. Don't forget to do your evaluations and do all the things that our organizers want you to do. And thank you, Leslie and team, and the National Council on Juvenile and Family Court Judges. Have a wonderful day. And take care of yourselves, especially Adriana's, because role playing, it's cathartic, but it's also like it's challenging, right? Because you have
It's
to.
5 o'clock somewhere, right?
Yeah, yeah. All right, great acting. Awards for everybody.